Okay, we are live.
I am watching the clock, so the minute it hits 1 o'clock, we'll call the meeting to order. Okay, it's now 1 o'clock, and we'll go ahead and call the meeting to order. This is the regular meeting, North Central Texas College Board of Regents. And the first item on our agenda is our second item is to establish a quorum. So I'll go ahead and call the roll. If you would please respond that you're present when I call your name, I would appreciate it. Mr. Grime. Mr. Grime. Dylan Ott. Christy Morris.
Here.
Dick Hayen. Did I hear Dick Hayen respond? Not yet. Okay. Mr. Henderson. No, Mr. Henderson. All right. And Erica Sullivan.
Here.
Okay. And Carla Metzler is here. So we have 4 members of the board, so we do have a quorum. So the next item on our agenda is the budget workshop, and I'm going to let Dr. Van Miller take that presentation.
Madam Chairman, before you begin, this is Dr. Wallace. It appears that Mr. Grime has been able to join us, perhaps.
Okay.
So the record might reflect that. Mr. Grime, have you been able to chime in?
Yep, I'm here.
Okay, perfect.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Appreciate it. All right. So at this point, Dr. Miller, go ahead.
Thank you, Chairman Metzler. We are going to discuss the budget at this point in time, and I want to apologize. There are 2 items on your agenda, the budget workshop here at the beginning, and then we incorrectly placed an action item later in the agenda about approval of the budget. And the reason I'm calling that your attention to that is that's where you will find the budget materials that I uploaded. I believe Dr. Wallace said it may begin on page 19 of your board packet. So if you want to find those, please do so. Otherwise, and for everyone else, I am going to share my screen and I will put a copy of what I'm speaking up for everyone. Here we go. Comment that I want to make here is that if you look at the color-coded chart, I actually put 2 previous year's budgets on here, and I did that intentionally. So I'm showing the 18-19 budget, I'm showing the 19-20 budget, and then the blue column is the proposed budget for next year. So you can compare this year's budget to the past 2 years. I'm going to scroll down to the second page and show you why I wanted both of those years present. Everyone knows we are in some difficult economic times, and this budget definitely reflects that. What we are going to attempt to move forward with this year is a new budget that is 6.6% lower than what we have in this current fiscal year. You see that reflected just over $63 million in next year's budget, which is $4.4 million less than the current year's budget of $67.5. But I also wanted you to notice it is also less than the prior year's budget of 18-19. That's when we had $63.7 million. So I just wanted everyone to see that, to show this budget has drastically been impacted by the economic uncertainty that we are facing, and I just wanted everyone to realize that. If we start here with the revenue projections on the revenue side of the budget, I tell you, part of this budget this year was very easy because at the very top here, when it comes to state funds, we're entering the second year of a biennium. So basically, our state funding does not change. Our appropriation doesn't change. We've been told that our insurance rates are going to be the same next year. That's on the benefit side, but the state will fluctuate their payment to us based upon that level. So essentially on the revenue side, we expect state funding to remain flat for the time being, I will say. Talk about that a little bit later. When it comes to property tax, we're not, this is found here on this other funds category, but when it comes to property tax, we're not anticipating any change. I mean, the EC has talked about this with the economic climate that our local communities in, even though property values, I think for this year are up about 9% in Cook County. With the economic uncertainty we're undergoing, I don't think there's going to be a lot of incentive for pushing a tax increase at this point in time. And so we are anticipating going with the effective tax rate once we get that, which will probably be late in July when we find out what that is. But basically, that's the revenue neutral tax rate. And so we're projecting very little change in property taxes. Well, that leaves us with tuition and fees. And members of the board, you probably remember this time last year, we had a significant increase in tuition for our students. And we said at that time, we were raising tuition, but we were guaranteeing our students it was going to be a tuition rate for 2 years. And, you know, in hindsight, don't know if we'd be real comfortable pushing a sharp tuition increase on our students right now anyway, knowing the uncertainty that's present, you know, in their lives as well. So basically, from the CFO standpoint, we have no new sources of revenue for next year's budget. So we are truly looking at things that are needing to be cut on the side. And you'll see even here on when it comes to tuition, that's where on this right-hand column, that's where you see all the red, because we created this current year's budget assuming that we were going to have enrollment growth, and we actually ended up with a slight decline in the fall. So we kind of started off behind the 8 ball when it came to tuition revenue for the year anyway. But so this, you can see we are projecting almost in our projected revenues, we are planning for the potential of a $4 million decrease in student revenue because of concerns about enrollment for the fall term, and also just trying to get back in line with where, in hindsight, we ideally should have been this time last year. But we weren't because of that enrollment decline that happened last year. So when you look at all these together, you see where we have reduced the revenue sources by about $4.4 million. Does anyone have any specific questions about the revenue side of the budget?
One thing I would add, ladies and gentlemen, is that we are hoping, and in this budget scenario, there is a case made for stabilization of the funds from the state. If we do have any state cuts, then this budget would have to be retooled early fall to reflect what the state may decide to pull. We were very fortunate, if you remember in the last board meeting, I reported that the state did cut all entities by 5% of their appropriations, except for community colleges. But we do not believe that we will necessarily be safe from that cut in the fall, but we are trying to balance the budget with what we could resource, hopefully through rainy day, if it wasn't too dramatic a decrease. But that is not reflected. Any cuts to state appropriations aren't in here yet, just simply the revenue side from tuition and fee, et cetera. So I just wanted to point that out a little bit as kind of a conversation if you'd like to have that in any way.
Thank you. Appreciate that. So now let's move on to the expense side of the budget. And this involved input from everyone across the campus. This was a really, it was a difficult process, but everyone was so willing to participate, and everyone had a grasp on what we were facing and what was needed. And back when we started the budget process back in February and March, we opened up with the idea that we ask all departments to cut 5% from their operating budgets. And everyone responded. And for the most part, that's exactly what we saw from our departments. And, you know, in some areas that's difficult because you can easily say we're going to cut everything 5%. There are some things that can't be cut 5%. Staffing, if we keep equal staffing levels, then we're going to keep equal salary levels. But we also have debt obligations. We have contractual obligations where increases are built in from year to year, and we have to absorb those. So we actually had to absorb, in many areas, cuts in excess of that 5% in order for everything to net out in that vicinity of 5%. But just some highlights of some of the things that were done on the expense side of the budget. Early in the spring semester, we instituted a hiring freeze, and that hiring freeze is going to continue over into the new year. We have every position that becomes opening is being evaluated by EC to determine if it is mission critical to fill that position, or if it is something that we can, at least in the meantime, do without and have others pitch in and help cover those duties and responsibilities. So the hiring freeze is built into this budget. We are proposing no increase in wages for any employees. I mean, that's across the board. Everyone will be plugged in at the same salary that they are receiving in the current year. Travel related expenses, which predominantly come in the category of professional development and mileage, those have been drastically reduced. I was looking earlier this morning. I think we've gone to from somewhere around $800,000 down to around $100,000 in those categories. So it's very lean, where we are going to have a minimal amount of professional development that is in one institutional account, and people across campus, if they have needs to attend such events, they can petition to this committee in an effort to receive the funds to allow them to attend or not. So we're going to try to be judicious with that spending. Virtually all capital expenditure requests have been deferred. I would say one exception that we're able to make there, we are able to get some critical IT needs met with the Federal CARES Act funding that we have received in the past month or two. We've got about $1.9 million from the federal government, and I fully expect at least half of that will go into the IT infrastructure to beef up our online presence that has come to the forefront over the last 3 months. And so this will allow us to improve those capabilities moving forward, hopefully we never have to go to all online instruction again, but our infrastructure will be better for those online classes that we are going to have out there. The next comment that I would like to make is I'm not going to scroll through each page of these expenses. I encourage you to look over them. If you have any questions, whether it's today or even later on, reach out to me. I'll be happy to help you with that. But I wanted to let you know that in building this budget with a 6.6% reduction, we always present this as a balanced budget where revenues equal expenditures. And one way we have helped to balance the budget, we have increased our contingency funds, our contingency budget to just over $1.1 million. It was about $600,000 last year. And we really think in this environment, it's critical that we do that. We need to have a cushion to protect ourselves against the uncertainty. There is enrollment uncertainty. What is enrollment going to look like in the fall? Is the state going to cut our funding in the fall? We could see a combination of those two things, very likely. So we wanted to have something built into contingency that could protect us from those type of events. As the budget stands right now at just slightly over 63 million, in my mind, that budget is reflective of about a 10 to 12% drop in student enrollment. So if we come up with a single digit drop in enrollment or anything better than that, obviously, I feel like we are in great shape with this budget, and we will, in fact, probably then have additional revenues. We can relook at some critical items in the budget that we may consider adding back to it later on. We would obviously come to the board for permission to do that, though. But so we feel like we've built in about a 12% reduction in enrollment there. With that contingency at 1.1, that 1.1 just happens to be approximately 10% of our state appropriation. So if the state were to cut our funding by 10%, technically we could say, well, this budget's safe because we had an amount in contingency that would be sufficient to cover that. Or if our drop in enrollment turned out to be more than 12%. I think I've calculated if it's around 16, 17%, somewhere in there with the contingency, we would potentially be in position with this budget to move forward. But the one thing that I want to address for you now, you may notice that in my discussion, one thing I have specifically stated is that our salaries would remain basically equal with no wage increases. But we have worked tirelessly on this budget to try to preserve the working people here at North Central Texas College. We have tried to do everything we can to minimize the budget without furloughs, laying off workers, eliminating positions. And I just think the executive team and all the departmental chairs and everyone has done a great job putting this budget together in an effort to try to accomplish that. From a CFO standpoint, eliminating full-time positions would be a quick and easy way to drop spending in the budget. But I've always found in my 30 years of higher ed that seems to be very short-sighted because we all know that in community colleges, economic downturns tend to lead to more enrollment in community colleges. Now, it may not in August. Our people may still be wondering what they're supposed to do, but most of us are confident by spring, next summer, the economic environment is going to create a boom for community colleges. If we go out today and lay off 10% of our workforce, and then 4 or 5 months later, we need to go right back out and try to hire those positions again because enrollment went back up. It just doesn't make sense to do that as a short-term fix to a problem when we need to be prepared for what is going to be in front of us 6 to 12 months from now. So we are going to take a look at this budget again in August. We'll have more information in August. We'll have better figures on what fall enrollment is going to be. We should have property tax information. We may know from the state what they plan to do at that point in time with our appropriation for next year. But we feel like this budget is a very good starting place, and we're confident in presenting it to you. And I welcome any questions or comments that any of you might have that you would like to me.
I'd like to just make a few comments here. One of the things that's important, number one, I have to thank Dr. Miller for his expertise in leading us through this pretty cumbersome budget year. It's a hard year. I applaud all the staff on their work of cutting and cutting. Every department was diligent in this work. One of the things I would remind you, several years ago as a board, you made a very difficult decision to remove contracts from non-faculty, non-term employees. At that time, that was a very difficult decision for you, but at this time, that's actually a benefit to this budget, and here's why. If we were looking at all staff contracts that we would have in those years, we would be looking at an immediate layoff today because the contracts would have been a commitment for 12 months. We would have had to make a very difficult decision now before we could offer contracts to individuals. Whereas now we're able to get into the fall, really get a sense of where we are financially, where enrollment's going to be without laying anyone off because they happen to be on a 12-month contract. Does that make sense? Please, if I'm not making sense, please let me help clarify it. But so that tough decision then to say no contracts for non-faculty, non-term, is now a benefit to those individuals because they would have been having to be issued a 12-month contract. We wouldn't know what was going on in the fall. We would have had to non-renew a lot of contracts, in my opinion. That being said, we're still heavily contingent on enrollment in the fall, and I hate that. It's one of the challenges of serving a large district with a minimal tax base, to be very blunt. It's one of the challenges that you don't have tax representation in Denton County. That's something we've talked about before, so there's no cushion to support if tuition and fee revenue comes down. There's no real backdoor to fund those things. And so that's a conversation too that we're having with legislature right now, in the sense that this is an example of the ebb and flow of what you can do. But I want to be very transparent in this. If we come back with low enrollments, the conversation of layoff, RIF, whatever that be, will have to be had. We just will have to look at that if enrollment isn't where it needs to be. Later on in the month, our teams in enrollment management will be helping us sort of determine what that number really looks like, what that number can be, so that we have a goal to try to help meet. And we encourage all of our employees to be a part of encouraging students to complete a course, to go back in and register. But we'll be unveiling some of those numbers. It's just uncertain times right now. We are not the only community college in the state having the exact same questions. Averages in fall enrollment are looking at 15, 20, 25, 35, and even some of our colleges forecasting 40% reductions in their fall enrollment. That's painful for the community colleges in the state. But this budget, I'm proud of it because it maintains everyone's positions until we just absolutely don't have a choice. And our hope is that enrollment is substantial enough in the fall that we don't even have to look at layoff or RIF or any of those things. But we do want to be transparent and say we're not confident we're out of the quote peripheral woods yet, in sense that we don't know what the state may do to cut funds, et cetera. And we're all open for any questions the board have for us.
I have a question. Could somebody address the auxiliary expense line? Some of the sports have gone to zero, and we hadn't talked about that. So I was just wondering.
So we are still in the process of notifying some of our team PIM members, but we are eliminating 2 athletic programs.
Okay.
Those 2 programs are rodeo. They were notified early in the year. And rodeo is not the same. I remind our community that is not our equine programs or any of those. This is strictly rodeo. That program is being closed. And then we are also forced to close our tennis program, given the small numbers of students in the program and the scholarships and some of the other extenuating circumstances around those 2 programs. I always remind us that we look at these things regularly. We tried rodeo. It was just a challenge. Our equine teams are our national champions. If you remember, they've been doing excellent. It's an expense. We've already done a lot to reevaluating our usage of the college's farm, et cetera. We're now being able to raise our own hay for our equine programs and some of those things. But this budget does include the closure of those 2 athletic programs.
All right, thank you.
I had a question under academic instruction. I was just wondering if you could provide more information on why social sciences was significantly reduced.
Ms. Sullivan, that is actually a restructuring of the department. And I'm sure one of our academic folks could, I can't off the top of my head remember the details, but it's just, it is a restructuring. Is it history, Dr. Wallace? You help me with that?
Yes, what we've done, Ms. Sullivan, is we're splitting that division again. It has gotten so large, so you're going to see a new division line that's increased and social sciences decreased. The overall amount of funds for those departments are still pretty equal. So what we've done is government history has its own department, and then the humanities, social science, and the others have a different department. There's 2 departments for that program in the fall. It's just that department got so large that one department chair was going to struggle to keep up. It was just so large. So that's why you see kind of a zeroing out. It's really a reduction. A reduction. It's really just a moving those funds to another line. That makes sense?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, perfect.
Thank you.
Additional questions? Okay, if not, we'll go ahead and move on to the next item. I wanted to also make the announcement. I think Mr. Hayen joined the meeting, so glad to have him here. All right, the next item would be recognitions and achievements. Dr. Wallace.
So very generically, I have to just again applaud our faculty and staff for their due diligence and their work right now in uncertain terms. We began phase 1 today, and I'll give you a little more about that in my report in a moment. But I have to recognize our teachers, our staff, and their hard work right now during all this time. It's been a tough road, and they've just really kept up and done a great job. Everyone's working hard from their homes. So I just wanted to be sure that we recognize them. Again, also, I would like to just say that NCTC has been named by the Guide to Online Schools as the 13th best community college in the state of Texas for fully online degree programs and certificates. I think that's an accomplishment we should be very proud of. I applaud our instructional designers and our work through our department chairs and our faculty that teach online. To have that accolade against large community colleges is marvelous. So I really appreciate their work and wanted to let them know that we applaud their efforts there. Those are the 2 recognitions that I have for today's meeting, and I have some more things I'll report in my comments.
Okay, thank you very much. The next item on the agenda is the citizens communication. Sandy, do we have anyone that has asked to address the board today? The answer is
no.
No. Okay. Thank you very much. The next item on our agenda is reports to the from the Regents, and the first one is the Executive Committee, and I'll be making that report at this time. We did meet the Executive Committee on June the 8th at 5:15 on the college campus to discuss items such as Dr. Wallace reviewed the comprehensive back to work plan. Dr. Miller presented information regarding the board reserves and the option for utilizing these funds. Also, Debbie Sharp joined us to talk about funding for an essential service project that we have and some grants information. And then Dr. Miller provided an update on the current cash, and then Dr. Wallace gave an enrollment update, and we adjourned. The next committee would be the Finance Committee. Christy, do we have a report for that?
Yes, we met last Thursday. We went over the budget, which Dr. Miller's already discussed. We talked about a grant proposal for the Completion Center, which will be later on the agenda. We reviewed the investment policy, something that's just required to happen yearly. We talked about changing the name for our cash reserves and setting some minimum and maximum targets, but are not ready to present any recommendations. We looked at the May financials and the third quarter investment report, and you guys will see all those in a few minutes.
Okay, thank you for that report. The next item on our agenda would be the Chancellor's Administrative Report. Dr. Wallace.
So just a couple of things. Number one, we did, as I mentioned earlier, we have begun phase 1 reopening. That is essential personnel, executive personnel are back on a floating basis for the next month. We met as executive council briefly this morning. It was kind of, I think Denise said it's surreal to be back in a room, even this 6 feet apart, when you've been 3 months of working at a distance. But we're doing our best to bring people in. We're taking temperatures at doors. We're providing face masks, PPE. We close at 4:30 during the Monday, Thursday in order for housekeeping to come back into the 100 building and do a sterilization each evening. So I will remind our community that may be involved. We're still not quite open to the public yet. But we are getting there. You can do all you need to do for registering courses through our online portals and through your NCTC. We will begin in July. July 20 is when we're hoping to begin our phasing of opening to the public through appointments and using our systems that we have like QLIS and some of our appointment tracking programs to allow people to come in face-to-face. We have placed plexiglass. We have placed PP&E throughout the district in those high trafficked areas. On the Gainesville campus, even into July, you're going to see a lot of the buildings remain closed. That is only for the protection of students, but the 100 building will be the busiest. We've reopened and begun to finish our students in career and technical programs as early as last week. We have welding students on campus, still practicing social distancing, but finishing that. We're going to begin to bring back our fire science programs to finish in Denton County. Some of those courses. We are also finishing industrial technology soon, mechanics. We're going to look at our Dean and Health Science, Dean Hernandez, is looking diligently at how we complete our nursing students. There's a lot of apprehension there from the student population, which I totally understand. I would remind you our biggest dilemma right now is that we just simply don't have clinical spaces in which to do this because hospitals are still sort of tied down on what they can do. The PP&E and hospital beds, et cetera, that we've provided to communities are now we're not going to see those returned to us probably until the fall. That's local hospitals. We've donated those to use and borrow. So that's also kind of affecting a little bit. That was an encouragement, though, that the state of Texas, through our representatives, asked us to help hospitals out, and we were very proud to be able to do that. But we are working on bringing all of our students back slowly and all of our faculty and staff. And our goal right now is that when we get back second, third week of August, that we hope to return to the new norm. We're not going to see normalcy that we're used to for quite a while. We're going to see PP&E. We're going to see mask. We're going to see social distance. We're going to see smaller classes sizes. So working through all that. We would be negligent if we didn't know that this is also a very difficult time on social reform issues, et cetera. And I just wanted to say I'm very proud that the NCTC has been asked by Mayor Chris Watts. Mayor Watts is the mayor of Denton. Mayor Watts has asked us to participate in an ad hoc committee to review use of force policies by the city of Denton and their police department. And that will be a nominated student to serve on that panel alongside University of North Texas and Texas Women's University representation. So we're very proud that we were asked and called upon to be a part of positive change and positive conversations among all of our areas. So we look forward to seeing that nomination come forward from our Student Service Department. We are probably going to look at trying to have a face-to-face board meeting maybe in July to give us a sense of what that might be like and get that. That's not going to be if we have to actually still have that board meeting, but we probably will based on COVID, as I've expressed in the past, and just so many things are outlined. We will let the board know that. But because of that, we've tentatively set that new board meeting for, and I've got to pull up a calendar, of course. That is set right now for July the 27th, pushed as far back so that we can get our budget hearings done in August at 6:00 p.m. And I think we're going to try to have that in the boardroom unless things change dramatically. We'll make sure that our maintenance staff, socially distant chairs for audience participation, et cetera. We'll still have a venue similar to this where people can watch online that don't want to come physically. We'll make that happen as well. Thank you to Sandy Otto and Elizabeth Abu and Alex Holland and their work on making these things happen because they're so complicated to get everybody online. So I appreciate that. But we will probably try to have that board meeting in face-to-face as well. And in conclusion, I have to say that we're going to be sending out some positive messaging about the fact that students in the fall can take courses as they are comfortable. We want to focus on the notion that we are open. There's online options if you're worried about coming to campus. There's going to be face-to-face if you're not a good online student. There's also going to be some pretty awesome things in synchronous instruction that we've not really experimented with in the past, which is online, but an actual physical time where you check in and you're watching your professor online at that moment. So you're going to see a little bit of a shift on our schedule, and you'll see a new code that has I believe it's has an S in front of it, basically SONL, that means synchronous online learning, so that the students, when they register for fall courses, will know, listen, I'm not very good at online, but I can easily do this if I'm still got a faculty member in front of me, like we are today. So we'll be putting that information out through our marketing department and public relations, and of course through our advising center and all of those areas for those changes. We want students to feel comfortable. In fact, if you're watching, we encourage you, come back to school in the fall. Don't stop your educational pursuits. It's too important to your future. Our economy is important, and we will be able to get you good quality jobs and help you succeed. And that's the message we want to send to everyone, and we want all of us to carry as well. That's all I have for you, unless you have further questions or any comments for me. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. All right, the next item on our agenda is reports to the Regent. Dr. Miller and the May financials.
Yes, if you look at the financials, I just call a couple of things to your attention. On the first page regarding statement of funds, this month our total board reserve balance just barely crept over the $13 million mark. And so wanted you to see that. On the next page, there's a couple of things in these numbers as I've been watching the past few months. So there's a couple of things I'm looking at that give me reason for concern, a couple of things that I see that give me reason for optimism. And I'll point out the optimism on the second page. If you look at the budget comparison year to year, you see source of funds and use of funds. If you compare the 2 years, you'll notice that both revenues and expenses are up from last year, which is what we would expect. We had like a 3.7 million larger budget. but the gap between the revenue and the expenses was just under $8 million at this time last year. It's just over $2 million, excuse me, just over $10 million this year. So I like to see that spread increasing. Gives me hope that final budget and we have our audit at the end of the year. I'm encouraged that our final numbers will look better than they did last year. So that is a positive. The main concern I have will still be, like I said last month, on the 4th page. If you look at the cash flow report, summer is always the time when our cash balances get lower because we don't have as much revenue coming in. And we're running behind where we were the same time last year. Just something that I'm being very cautious of and looking at. Been working with the finance committee, and we hope to put some recommendations in place, maybe moving forward with maybe additions to our investment policy, some strategies that we can do to have more confidence with these reserve balances to make sure that in any given year we have the right funds available to make sure we can get through those low times. And so I'm very optimistic we're going to have something worked out in the next couple of months and bring it back to you as the board to show what our recommendations are. Anyone have any comments about anything in the financials?
I would also remind the board that cash is always a little bit lower and a concern when you end your summer months. And so then cash tends to come in a heavier amount from August, et cetera, through Pell and some of those things that reimburse us. So I would be negligent not to say to the board that we may need to come to you in July and ask for a few extra dollars for cash interimly in order for us then to reimburse the board later in August or September rather. But I just want you to know that we're doing a really good job. This is the evidence of the fluctuation of enrollment for NCTC. This is how much enrollment drives our college budgets, our college, every ounce of the college is driven by enrollment. And I don't want to beat the dead horse, so to speak, but I'm sitting here saying that's the challenge with not having taxation among the entire district in some form. When we created, service areas back in the 90s, and they didn't say, hey, pay a branch maintenance with that like into Graham does. And so I just wanted to, I don't want to harp, but yet I needed to harp a little. But this is sort of where you start to struggle when you're trying to serve large without being a burden to your local tax that's not as large a community. Does that make sense, Board?
Yes.
Just want to focus on that a little bit.
Okay. All right. Thank you very much for that report. The next item on our agenda is the consideration of the approval of the consent agenda items. And as always, if there is anybody who would like to take one of those A or B off, and consider those independently, you would need to identify at this time. All right, since there is no need to do that, then we would need an approval to approve the consent agenda items as presented. I would need a motion.
I move that we approve as proposed.
So we have a motion made by Mr. Grime. Do we have a second?
I'll second.
A second by Ms. Morris. Okay, any additional discussion? Okay, all those in favor, please signify by saying aye.
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 Are
Aye.
there opposed? Please signify by saying aye. There were no opposed for the record. All right, we'll move on to the next item, which is the discussion and possible action. And as Dr. Miller addressed us earlier, indicating that the budget was incorrectly placed in this part of the agenda. So we'll be tabling that for a future meeting. The next item would be the possible discussion and possible action on funding the student success proposal. And I believe Debbie Sharp will address the board.
With your permission, I want to give just a brief introduction to Debbie and Donna's work here. What I want to let you know is what that you're about to see is a request for what I would call a grant from the Board of Regents. And so I want you to understand this is not a permanent, sustainable answer to this dilemma. It is a temporary 1 year for us to allow us to continue. You would have received a very, very large document, 71-page proposal ahead of the board meeting that is fully available for our public if they request that and would like to see that, but we just didn't put that on the heavy end of the board book. It's a pretty heavy document detailing what's requested, and then the executive summary is made available to you. But I just wanted to say this has been a huge work again by our grants department and all of those in those student success areas to really come up with a plan that they believe is appropriate. And then I'll turn that over to Debbie to introduce and continue.
Thank you so much. I want to first say thank you to the board for letting us present this grant request to you. As you know, over the years, we've been very fortunate to receive numerous grants from various funding sources, Department of Ed, Department of Labor, and to be real honest, we've been so blessed to receive 4 grants over the last 5 years that have truly impacted our student success. You know, the board has heard a lot about our goals as far as iDream and what we're trying to do there. We'll talk more about our quality enhancement plan. So these grant programs have allowed us to really take some great best practices to ensure student success for our students. And so I thought what I'd do to begin was to kind of do an overview of the 4 grants and then talk to you about what we're recommending as far as a revamp for our completion center and then ask for the request. So looking at those 4 grants that we currently have, these are our grants that have been existing for between 5 and 4 years. The first one is the Department Ed Title III grant, which we used to establish the completion center. We actually got this grant in 2015. Since that time, that grant has served over 16,000 students in some form or fashion. I must also commend the staff that they actually developed the first year college course. We call it NCTC 1001. This course, many of you are familiar with in a college setting, maybe your orientation course, but this really provides what students need to know to be successful at NCTC. And these courses are taught as part of their regular workload by many of the completion center staff. And so they've done a tremendous job with that. But not only that, there are lead counselors or coaches that really provide that one-on-one support for our students. So that was our Title III grant. And then we also received from the Department of Labor a Wagner-Pizer Career Services grant. This was a 3-year grant that has allowed NCTC to really enhance what we can provide from a career placement, job services kind of thing for our students. We've depended heavily on our technical faculty to do that in the past. And so having a career service center has now allowed us to provide those additional services for our students, but I also think additional services for our communities because we now have a centralized place that we do job posting and we can help match our students with those employer needs. So that's been a big advantage both for our students and our employers. The third grant is the Department of Labor Tech Hire Grant. This grant focuses on our CTE programs as well as our industrial technology programs and really provides that coaching to recruit students into those programs to help walk them through what they need to do to be successful in each of those courses. Our advisors and coaches within those specific programs probably do about 75% of our advising for our technical programs. And it's really having an impact on the number of students that are being able to complete those degree programs. Currently, they have 350 participants, and our plan is to have 450 before the end. And then our last is our Department of Education TRIO grant. This grant helps low-income first generations and students with documented disabilities that attend NCTC. You may recall, if you've been on the board for a while, we've had this grant for a long time. I believe the first one was funded in 2000. It's a 5-year grant, and so we've been able to write this grant and get continued funding. However, I will say that we're hopeful in July that we'll receive funding for this grant. I'm also realizing the fact that this grant is very competitive. And when looking at the actual writing of this proposal, when we looked at the needs section, and I've been involved for a long time, there's been a difference between our general population students and our disabled, first generation and low income. There was a bigger gap. Our gap has narrowed, which to me says we've done great work in that area. However, when you're looking at it from a grant reviewer perspective, we may not receive the whole points that they would give for a needs section. And I do know from past experience, if you don't get almost 100 points on your score, you may not be funded. And so that's why we've included TRIO in this, because we know there's a good possibility it might not be funded. We're hopeful that it will, but not knowing until July if it will or will not. And looking at those, the impact these grants have had on our students' success rates, if you looked at between the all four of these grants, their persistence and retention rates have improved between 12 and 14%. Completion rate has improved by 7%. And also there've been an increase in number of certificates and certifications and degrees that have been earned within those programs. And so we can, one good thing about grants is we have KPIs, and our staff is used to determining, are they being successful? Are they meeting their goals? And we would propose within this proposal to the board that would continue, that we would have KPIs that we would measure and we would submit to the board on a quarterly basis how we're doing, how is our persistent rates, how is our retention rates, how many degrees have been attained, those kind of things, so that you could be sure that the funds that you would allocate towards these projects would also be measured, and we'd be tracking that as well. I mentioned already that what these grants have allowed us to do is really to work with our first time in college students, our at-risk populations, as well as those students have barriers they're trying to overcome to be successful. And so, we're here asking for these funds today because we feel the commitment and know the value of what these staff members are doing and how important student success is. And so when we first realized that all these grants would be ending in August, we were like, there's 21 staff members currently funded through these grant programs. We recognize, given the current situation, that we can't come asking for all 21, even though we wish we could. We also realize that we can't lose those highly skilled, highly trained individuals that have made these things happen. And so we worked as a team trying to figure out what's the best proposal that we could revamp what we currently are doing so that we can hopefully continue to provide those types of services to our students. Grant programs provide us an opportunity to really try the best practices. There may be things that we've tried that did not work quite as well, and so we don't have to continue those things. And so what we've done with these 4 grants is looked at really as what has had the biggest impact on our students and what do we want to recommend to continue. Quality enhancement plan, as boards, you've heard us talk about that before. As you know, we're moving into our reaccreditation this time. And so this, our upcoming one, our quality enhancement plan topic fits right into this. And that is soft skills and employability skills. We are putting together a program that would not only embed in our technical programs, but also our academic programs. And some of this is coming from our CNLA stakeholder meetings. Our employees are telling us that they want graduates that have those soft skills, have those employability skills. And so we want to make sure that when we graduate someone, irregardless of the degree, they will have those skills. We're going to start out, of course, small in some of our technical areas. And as we move through the next 5 to 10 years, we'll be able to incorporate or embed those into all of our courses. In looking at, I mentioned already that we had 21 staff that currently are employed through these grant programs. What we would like to recommend is that we would like to basically create an umbrella under the Completion Center, that we would pick the best strategies from all 4 of these grants to ensure student success, retention rates, persistence rates, and put those within the Completion Center. And by doing that, what we're recommending through this proposal is that we would keep our 4 current directors, and I say that one of those would be what we would be calling a QEP director in career services, and that would be Daphne Riddles, because what she's currently doing, some of those things will continue, but she would also take the leadership in developing and managing our QEP project as part of our SACS accreditation. We would then like to recommend that instead of having the 13 success coaches, that would then be moved to having 8 success coaches. And we would then have 2 career services coaches, 1 technical specialist, and 2 part-time completion center lab specialists. And looking at how do we provide these services throughout all the campuses, those numbers will allow us to do that. Again, we've cut down the staff, but we are trying to focus on those most effective strategies that will be help our students be successful. So we would go from a 21 full-time and 6 part-time staff. We're proposing 15 full-time and 2 part-time staff. In addition to the ones I just detailed, we also are recommending some cross-funding, one being a Perkins grant and coaching director. I have not mentioned the inside track coaching model, but this is an area that we've seen great success in working with, and it initially started through our these grant programs that we provide in-depth training through a company called Inside Track, but basically it's coaching model that provides our advisors, our counselors with a system in place that they can do one-on-one coaching for our students. And then excited to say this past year, we expanded that to our faculty. And so our faculty are also being trained in that coaching mentoring model. And so this person that would be requesting is a Perkins grant and coaching director. 75% of that salary would be paid by the Perkins grant, would help oversee that grant. 25% would help to continue the coaching model, inside track model throughout our institution. The other person that was included in here is called a student inclusion director. As you know, we're doing lots of work with equity, diversity, and inclusion, also the Achieving the Dream. This person would then be able to help us focus on undocumented students, minority students, underrepresented federal classes such as foster and homeless students. And so being able to provide a holistic approach to make sure that we're addressing all student needs. So with that, what I'm requesting then is that 15 full-time and 2 part-time positions. We then looked at an operational cost, realizing that we've asked all departments to cut their budgets. We are also looking at cutting the operational budget for this particular program. We would be requesting $25,000, and that is basically just to be sure that we can do the other kind of things in addition that the staff would need to be successful in their endeavors. So our total request for this 1 year would be $725,101. That would allow us to continue this reorganized completion center for 1 year. Our plan would then be to continue to seek and look for additional grant fundings that could help us continue this project. And then, to be real honest, our goal would also be then for the next funding year, 2021-22, that we could include as part of our budget these staff members within our current institutional budget. And we think this is realistic because we looked at a model where that we'd be representing and we're going low at a 2.5% retention rate. By doing that, these programs would serve about 5,000 students. So that would be a minimum of 125 students that would be retained each semester. And if you multiply that out over three semesters, that's as much as $562,500 in additional tuition and fee revenue, which then would help offset this. Then that does not also then include the state appropriations that we would get. So our goal would be either to institutionalize this grant so that we could use it as part of our regular budget or to find additional grant funds. But as you can imagine, with the COVID situation and everything that's going on right now, we just did not have it in this year's budget to do this. But as Dr. Miller mentioned earlier about, we don't want to lose these highly qualified, many of these coaches are our best trained as far as inside track, and many have received additional certifications. And so we really appreciate the board's willingness to at least consider this proposal or this grant proposal. And our Donna Updegrove is on the line. If you have additional specific questions she could address, and then if you have any questions that I could address, we'd be happy to do that as well. Thank you.
So that being said, re-emphasizing that this is a grant from the board out of discretionary board reserves, not out of rainy day or any other. Typically, the board has funded project-based things in the past out of discretionary, for example, remodel, IT, security infrastructure. This would be the first time that the board would be issuing what I would call an institutional grant to fund student success initiatives, with the understanding that you would receive the same sorts of reports that a Department of Ed or a state grant would receive. So you will get quarterly updates on the success matrix for these grants, as you would if you were a funder from outside of NCTC. I think that's important for you to understand, because it does open an ability beyond, if we were thinking outside of COVID-19, outside of where we are now, it gives us an ability to pilot as well the notion of the board funding special student incentive things, where you have detailed outcomes you want to achieve, and utilizing your funds for some of that work. I think that also gives us that opportunity. So respectfully, Madam Chair, we ask that the board fund what has been presented at the amount of $725,101 for 1 year only, not a sustainable year beyond that, while we have our grant department working hard to find further opportunities to fund these, and without a total annihilation of some very important student success initiatives that have been working very well, and I have to say working extremely well among first generation students, students of color, students at risk. It's been imperative. We still serve a 1 to 700 student ratio between advisors and students, even with these positions. So that also gives you a sense of how dramatic it is if we lose all of these. And so we appreciate the board entertaining this. And Donna, Debbie, everyone, Melinda is open for any questions you may have.
All right. So I guess before we have any questions, we need a motion. And then after I have a motion and a second, then we'll open it up for additional discussion. Do I have a motion?
I'll make a motion to fund the NCTC Completion Center as presented.
We have a motion by Ms. Morris. We have a second.
I'll second.
Second by Erica Sullivan. Additional discussion at this time.
I just wanted to commend staff. It's a very innovative approach, and we're investing in the community.
Thank you.
Agreed. Okay, additional discussion? Okay, if not, we'll go ahead and take a vote. All those in favor of funding this motion with a second, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. There may be some on mute. Okay, are there any, those not in favor of this funding, please say aye. All right, so it appears that the motion carried unanimously. Thank you very much. Okay, the next item on our agenda is executive session, and we do not have a need for executive session today. So the next item brings us down to the last item, which is adjournment. So we have a motion to adjourn.
I'll make a motion to adjourn.
Thank you. I have a motion by Mrs. Morris. Do we have a second?
Second.
Second by Mr. Grime. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Thank you very much for your attendance today, and look forward to seeing everybody in person if we have to have a July meeting.
Work on that. Thank you all for being here today. Appreciate it.
Okay, bye.